Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin, and on this channel I upload all sorts of different types of content relating to true crime, education and psychology related topics. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy and you haven't already, then please do hit that subscribe button down below, and don't forget to turn on your little notification bell so you know whenever I upload a new video. So for today's case, we're going to actually be discussing a serial killer case, the upbringing of the serial killer, all the victims and the legal proceedings afterwards. I haven't done a serial killer case in a long time, so I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for one. But before we get started discussing today's case, I just want to thank the sponsor of today's video. So the sponsor of today's video is NordVPN, and they have given you guys a special offer. So if you guys visit the link nordvpn.com/caitlinrose, or if you use the code caitlinrose, you can get a 2-year plan with NordVPN with a huge discount as well as an additional month for free. With NordVPN, you can easily access TV shows, movies, games and more content at amazing speeds and from anywhere. So even if you are traveling, you are still able to access all of your favorite things online. And if there are any streaming sites, games or shows that haven't yet been released in your country, you can obviously watch them from anywhere using NordVPN. So you just have to choose your selected country from the map and you start watching. And not only this, but NordVPN does also offer you that extra level of protection. So when you are browsing online, you know that you are being safe and you have that extra level of protection. So you can keep looking at all your favourite sites with extra safety. So if you would like to check out NordVPN for yourself, then you can visit nordvpn.com/caitlinrose or use my code caitlinrose, as I said, for your discount. And I'll also leave the link and the discount code in the description for you so you guys can check it out. Just a final thank you to NordVPN for being the sponsor of today's video and showing your support for this channel. And before we jump on into the case, as always, I do just like to chuck in my little disclaimer at the start of the video, just letting you guys know that I'm not claiming to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases that I cover over on my channel. I'm simply relaying the information I'm able to find myself through research of certain sources on the internet, and because only certain sources are accessible to me, it means I may get things wrong, leave things out or mispronounce things. I apologise if I do any of those things. I'm not trying to cause anyone any harm or an injustice. I'm simply working with the information that I have available to me. And on a final note, I do apologise if I sound a little bit hoarse in this video. I've got a really dry throat. I've gone back to work and so my voice is a little bit overworked, but I still wanted to get this video up for you guys. So with all that being said, we shall just jump straight into the case. So for today's video, we're discussing the serial killer known as the Happy Face Killer, who was born under the name Keith Hunter Jesperson. Keith Jesperson was born on the 6th of April in 1955, and he was the middle child born to Leslie and Gladys Jesperson. Leslie, Gladys and their 5 children lived in a place called Chilliwack in British Columbia in Canada, and from the sources that I read, it appeared that the children did not have the easiest early life. There were many claims that Leslie Jesperson was a violent alcoholic, and his father too was also particularly violent towards some members of the family. And these claims have since been disputed by Leslie Jesperson himself, but a number of other family members have since confirmed the claims of abuse. Keith Jesperson was said to have struggled during his early years, in particular his school years, as he received quite a bit of teasing at the hands of the other children, so his peers, particularly with them targeting the fact that he was rather large for his age. The torment did not exclusively occur at the hands of his peers, as his brothers had also nicknamed him Igor or Ig because of his size, and they would continually tease him. He would often find himself in trouble at school or at home for misbehaving, and as a result of this, he would then be punished by his father quite severely. These punishments would often be beatings, typically with a belt, but there were also some specific incidents in which his father had allegedly given him an electric shock as a form of punishment. Because of this difficulty with his peers and at home, he was a rather isolated and lonely child, and it's reported that at a rather young age, he began torturing and killing animals of different types, anything that he had access to. It was believed that these harmful acts towards animals had started when he was as young as 5 years old, and it was also reported that he sometimes pitted the animals against each other so he could watch them kill each other. Keith Jesperson lived in a trailer park with his family and would typically catch cats, dogs and sometimes birds that he had access to around the trailer park. These acts of violence towards animals continued as he got older, and would later claim that he himself believed at the time that his father would be proud of him beating and torturing these animals. He was also later known to have stated that when he was young and carrying out these acts of torture on animals, he would often consider what it would be like to do the same to another person. And when he was around 10 years old, Jesperson would carry out his first act of attempted murder. Jesperson at the time of this act had been friends with another young boy named Martin, and the pair would often get themselves into a lot of trouble together. But at some point their relationship changed, and Jesperson believed that he was being punished unfairly and that he was receiving blame for the wrongdoings of Martin, and he eventually attacked Martin because of this. Keith violently attacked the boy, continually beating him until his father had to pull him off of the boy, and he later said that in that moment he had every intention of killing his friend. And then around a year after this incident, Jesperson had attacked another one of his peers. Keith had been swimming in a local lake when another boy had swum up to him and proceeded to hold Jesperson under the water until he fell unconscious. Jesperson then encountered this same boy not long after at a public pool, and Jesperson had attempted to exact his revenge on the boy by holding him under the water with every intention of drowning him. A lifeguard had spotted the incident and had managed to intervene before it had gotten too far, and the boy had walked away relatively unscathed. Some sources report that Jesperson had experienced another traumatic event when he was around 14 years old, and he claimed that it was at this age that he was sexually assaulted. So eventually, despite all of his troubles, Keith Jesperson did graduate from high school, but he was prevented from applying to colleges as his father had maintained this belief that he would not be capable of graduating. Not long after leaving high school, Jesperson had met a girl and the pair had entered into a seemingly serious relationship. And then in 1975, 20-year-old Keith Jesperson married Rose Huck, and the pair soon grew their family, eventually having a total of 3 children together. And at this point in his life, Jesperson had started working as a full-time truck driver to provide for his family. A little while into their marriage, Rose Huck began to suspect her husband of having affairs. She found that there were several occasions where unknown women would call up her home asking for her husband, and after 14 years of being together, Rose decided to pack up their belongings and move her and her children to her parents' home in Washington, all while Jesperson was out on a job. The couple eventually finalised their divorce in 1990, and in the meantime, Jesperson continued to see his children whenever he was in the area of their new home. Following his divorce, Jesperson had decided that he wanted a complete change of career and began training to become a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman. But this dream of his was soon cut short when he suffered a serious injury during his training, and he would no longer be fit to apply for the role. And so, as a result of this, he returned back to working as a truck driver, travelling across the country, and eventually he relocated permanently to a place called Cheney in Washington. And it was at this point in his life that his desire to kill had become so prominent that he had this realization that his job as a truck driver would give him the perfect means to act on his desires without raising suspicion. The first confirmed victim of Keith Jesperson was a woman named Tonya Bennett. On January the 23rd, 1990, Jesperson had met Bennett in a bar and introduced himself, and before long she was invited to his home that he was renting at the time. He had later claimed that his initial intentions were just to sleep with Bennett, but when she had rejected him once they were inside his home, he had continued to beat her. During the attack, he claimed he panicked that she would later inform the police of the beatings, and as he described, he put his fist in her mouth and ultimately killed her. After killing Tonya Bennett, he went back to the bar to have some drinks, and he made a point of talking to the other customers there so that he had established an alibi. After being back at the bar for a little while, he then returned to his home to collect the remains along with any possessions that Bennett had brought with her in order for him to then go and dispose of them. The following day, he headed out to a job moving across the country once again. It was reported that Tonya Bennett's remains were found just a few days after she was killed, and authorities at the time had numerous leads but nothing that led them directly to Keith Jesperson. On April the 12th of that same year, around 10 p.m, Jesperson was in a shopping centre car park in California when he was approached by a woman holding an infant. The woman had appeared to have been intoxicated, and she and her child ended up getting into his vehicle while the mother spoke to Jesperson. She had told Jesperson that her name was Jean, and she said that her son was just 6 months old. And during their interaction, Keith had told the woman his full name, and the pair had continued to talk for a while before the conversation had become sexual in nature. Because of this change in conversation, Jesperson had driven them to a secluded area where the woman continued to carry out a sexual act on him, with the child lying in the back seat. Before long, the woman had stopped and she had asked Jesperson to drive them home. In response, he had become forceful with her and forced her to continue, which is when he then attempted to break her neck. After this attempt had failed, he realised that he did not wish to kill the child, and so he ended up driving the pair back to the shopping centre where they'd first met. The woman had informed the local authorities of the incident, and not long after, the police had arrested him in Corning, California. He was questioned at the scene, and then the officers had removed his handcuffs and instructed him to speak directly with a detective at the Shasta Police Department. When he did so, he was interrogated and ultimately told the authorities that her neck injury had actually been an accident because of the activities that they were partaking in inside a cramped car. And in support of his claim, he had directed the authorities to an empty bottle of alcohol near where they had parked the car that he had stated had belonged to this woman. And it seemed as though the detectives had believed his version of events, as he was very quickly released. A sexual assault charge was filed against him, and then he failed to appear in court, leading to a felony warrant being issued. He was subsequently arrested in Iowa, but the warrant that had been filed appeared to not hold up due to a lack of evidence, and so he ended up being charged with a misdemeanor instead. He was ultimately cleared of all charges due to, and I quote, "the cost of extradition wasn't worth it." Jesperson's next murder had occurred over 2 years after the killing of Tonya Bennett in August of 1992. On the 30th of August, the remains of a still unidentified woman were discovered in an area near Blythe in California, and this victim had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The following month, in Turlock in California, the remains of a Cynthia Lynn Rose were discovered, and this was confirmed to be Jesperson's third victim. According to Jesperson, this woman had been a sex worker who had chosen to let herself into his truck while he was asleep, parked at a truck stop. And then in November of that same year, the body of Lori Ann Pentland, another sex worker, was found in Salem, Oregon. Jesperson had later claimed that following the pair sleeping together, she had tried to charge him double what she had initially asked him for, and when he refused, she then threatened to call the police, and so in response, Jesperson had strangled her. Jesperson's fifth victim was discovered in June of 1993 in Santanella, California. This victim remains unidentified as well, but Jesperson described her as being a street person, possibly named Carla or Cindy. This victim was not initially linked to the other killings, as it had initially been ruled as a likely drug overdose, and this was simply due to the victim's appearance and the overall details surrounding the discovery. And the next victim was discovered in September of 1994, and this time it was a woman who Jesperson said was named Suzanne, but she too remains unidentified to this day. In January of 1995, Jesperson had promised a woman named Angela Surprise with a lift in his truck, taking her from Spokane in Washington to Indiana. Around a week into their journey, the woman had allegedly become impatient, and she begged that Jesperson hurry up as the trip was taking longer than expected and her boyfriend was waiting for her. And Jesperson had seemingly reacted badly to this, and he proceeded to sexually assault and strangle her. He then tied her up underneath his truck and continued to drive with her underneath the truck facing down in an attempt to grind off her face and prints. And 2 months later, Jesperson had attacked his then girlfriend. He had later claimed that Julianne Winningham, his girlfriend at the time, was only with him for his money, and on March 10th, 1995, he'd strangled the young woman. And because of the clear personal connection with this victim, Jesperson had started to fall on the radar of the authorities. He was arrested on March 30th, 1995 for Julie Winningham's murder after a week of questioning, although initially authorities had no evidence that could lead to an arrest. After remaining silent in the first few days of questioning, he then realised that he was likely going to be arrested, and he had attempted to take his own life twice. When these attempts were unsuccessful, he turned himself into the authorities in the hopes that they would reduce his sentencing. And it was during this period of time, while he was in custody for the murder of his then girlfriend, that he started to reveal some details of his other crimes, mostly to other criminals. He had later recanted many of these claims that he had made at this time, but then it was discovered that just a few days before his arrest, he had actually written a letter to his brother in which he confessed to killing 8 women over the period of 5 years. Because of this confession, many of the cold cases across the country were reopened by the authorities, and there were numerous that were considered to be possibly linked to Jesperson. At one point in time, Jesperson had been heard bragging that he had as many as 160 victims, but only 8 in total could ever be confirmed. He was ultimately given 3 consecutive life sentences to be served at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. But then in 2009, as a result of numerous cold case reopenings, he was indicted for murder in California and faced the additional charges. and because of this he was then given a 4th life sentence in 2010. Now, a bit of a jump, but this is still very related to the case of Jesperson's crimes. So the case of a woman named Laverne Pavlinac, I apologise if I mispronounce these names, is often connected to Jesperson's crimes because of what had happened in the early days of the investigation into Tonya Bennett's murder. After hearing about the details of Tonya Bennett's murder, Laverne Pavlinac had concocted a plan to put an end to her long-term abusive relationship with her partner John Sosnovsky. She'd requested a meeting with the lead detective investigating Tonya Bennett's murder, where she then proceeded to give a false confession on how her boyfriend had forced her to help him sexually assault and kill Tonya Bennett. Laverne and her boyfriend were subsequently arrested in March of 1990 and were convicted of the murder in 1991. And in an attempt to avoid the death penalty, John Sosnovsky had pleaded guilty to the crime and was sentenced to life in prison, while Laverne received a maximum sentence of 10 years. And this had come as a complete shock to Laverne, as it had been a much harsher sentence than she was initially expecting. And so she soon admitted to having made up the confession, but these claims were ignored. Because of this trial, the public's attention had turned to the couple as being responsible for Tonya Bennett's murder. And once hearing of this, Jesperson had written out a confession of murdering Tonya Bennett on a wall in a truck stop and had simply signed it with a smiley face. When this anonymous confession didn't really gain much public or media attention, he'd started to write letters to loads of different news and media outlets confessing his murders, signing each one of the confessions with the same smiley face. And it was because of this fact that Jesperson was given the name the Happy Face Killer. 5 years after being convicted, Pavlinac and Sosnovsky were released from prison when Jesperson had confessed to the murder of Tonya Bennett. He'd also provided the authorities with the location of Tonya Bennett's bag, which up until that point had not been discovered, and so this is what had helped to prove that he was guilty of Tonya Bennett's murder and that the other couple were innocent. And that is where I'm going to end today's case. So one of the main things with this case, everything is so horrific, like reading into the details of each of these attacks are awful, and I am glad that some justice was found, but I do genuinely hope that all of these unidentified victims related to this case do one day become identified just for the sake of their family and loved ones, so that some sense of peace can be found. I just want to say a big thank you to NordVPN once again for being the sponsor of today's video and for showing your support to the channel. And as I said, I'll leave the link and the code in the description box as well as on the screen here, so you guys can make the most of this fantastic discount. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.